We can't discuss the tsunami of disinformation jeopardizing American democracy without talking about the mothership, Fox. I don't call it news, even if they do, because it's not news. It is lucrative, however, raking in hundreds of millions of dollars for Fox Corp last year as it shovels out stuff like this.
Of all the things that January 6th was, it was definitely not a violent terrorist attack.
So let's not take the word of Fox's chief propagandist on that. Let's see what Chris Wray, Donald Trump's pick to head the FBI, says.
Unfortunately, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, January 6th was not an isolated event. The problem of domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Tucker Carlson, not one to let that get in the way of gaslighting 3 million people a night. He explains it away by amplifying a conspiracy theory that it was actually the FBI that instigated the attack on the Capitol.
Strangely, some of the key people who participated on January 6th have not been charged. Look at the document. The government calls those people unindicted co-conspirators. What does that mean? Well, it means that in potentially every single case, they were FBI operatives.
The case that Carlson is talking about goes back to June. It involves Thomas Caldwell, who has pled not guilty. And according to statements in court documents, that alleged operative was most likely his wife. And you'd think that Carlson would know this. After all, he interviewed Caldwell and his wife, not once but twice. The second time for a 50-minute long interview, 5-0. Carlson dedicates so much airtime to disinformation that he produced a 3-part documentary, and in it, he pushes other conspiracy theories like Antifa being behind the attack, which is a Fox favorite.
There were likely not all Trump supporters, and there are some reports that Antifa sympathizers may have been sprinkled throughout the crowd.
He also knew that there's always bad actors that will infiltrate large crowds.
You want to know how disingenuous those comments are? Those same hosts were texting Trump's chief of staff during the attack, trying to get him to call off the crowd. And some Trump supporters charged in the riot don't want to share credit. So that tells you something. One saying, quote, it was not Antifa at the Capitol. And another Trump supporter saying they, quote, proudly take responsibility for storming the castle. Carlson also likes to go full Orwell, claiming the insurrection was not an insurrection.
Oh, it was an insurrection. So how many of the participants in that insurrection have been charged with insurrecting, with sedition, with treason? 0.
Cue the Fox backup singers.
No one has been charged with sedition or insurrection. Has anybody been charged with sedition? Nobody. Has anybody been charged with treason? Nobody. So why do they keep calling it an insurrection?
How many times do words like insurrection, sedition, or treason appear in Biden's own DOJ indictments against the January 6 rioters? The answer, 0.
Just last week, Fox's Brit Hume tweeted, quote, let's base our view on whether January 6 was an insurrection on whether those arrested are charged with insurrection. So far, none has been. Tweets that don't age well for 200, please, because 3 hours later, the DOJ announced an indictment charging 11 people with seditious conspiracy, and you know who says it was an insurrection? Them. Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes, quote, you can call it an insurrection or you can call it a war or a fight. His co-defendant, Kelly Meggs, wrote on Facebook, quote, wait for the 6th when we are all in D.C. to insurrection. Rhodes and Meggs have both pled not guilty. Still, alleged insurrectionists have a greater handle on the truth than their biggest cheerleader, who, according to a federal judge, can't be trusted farther than he can throw his pom-poms. Fox's own lawyers argued as much in a defamation suit against the network. Successfully, they argued. The judge in that case quoting their apparently convincing argument, quote, the general tenor of the show should then inform a viewer that he is not stating actual facts about the topics he discusses and is instead engaging in exaggeration and non-literal commentary. And Fox's own lawyers argued that any reasonable viewers arrive with an appropriate amount of skepticism about the statements that Tucker Carlson makes. Wishful thinking, perhaps, because according to Pew Research, Republicans predominantly get their political news from Fox, far more than from any other right-wing cable channels. When Ted Cruz needs the biggest audience possible to self-flagellate for referring to January 6th as terrorism, where does he go?
You called this a terror attack when by no definition was it a terror attack. That's a lie. You told that lie on purpose, and I'm wondering why.
The way I phrased things yesterday, it was sloppy, and it was frankly dumb. And
I don't buy that.
Whoa,
Whoa. I don't buy that. Look, I've known you a long time, since before you went to the Senate. You were a Supreme Court contender. You take words as seriously as any man who's ever served in the Senate. And every word, you repeated that phrase. I do not believe that you used that accidentally. I just don't.
And when Fox needs to fill up its primetime lineup, who do they install? Tucker Light, who has fashioned himself in the image of Fox's demigod of delusion and disinformation.
This may be a lot of things, this moment we're living through, but it is definitely not about Black lives.
These protesters and BLM activists don't care about the evidence, and they don't care about justice either.
At this point, there is no remaining doubt that Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense.
This is a clear-cut case of self-defense.
Actually, it's a clear-cut case of how to cultivate an echo chamber, or a gremlin. Water it, feed it, until it multiplies. The only thing that stops it? Sunlight. Next, we'll speak to a former Fox political editor who was a key figure in one of the network's most consequential projections in the 2020 election, but was fired after he helped Fox make the right call on election night. His insight on how to combat disinformation when democracy in peril returns.